All right, no time like the present. Might as well jump right into it. Panther-Lair Show on a Tuesday night here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Of course, the podcast later in the week. Hope everyone's having a good week so far. And it's funny. I always get to Tuesday nights and I think to myself, boy, it's been quite a week. So it's been a heck of a week, hasn't it? And it's only like Tuesday. We're only 2 days into the week, or in the case of Pitt, I guess this week we're 3 days into the week because if the Panthers having a game on Sunday, it sort of feels like the week already got started with Pitt news, and somehow if it's a game on Saturday, then it feels there's that break of Sunday, and it feels like a new week starts on Monday. But this week really feels like it started on Sunday with the game at Georgia Tech, that loss, and obviously we got a lot to say about that game. 71-65, Pitt loses in Atlanta to the Yellow Jackets. A team that came in 9-8. Overall 5-6 in the ACC, really kind of right there with Pitt. Pitt being 9-6 overall, 5-5 in the ACC, and it was a game that was there for the taking. And coming out of another close loss, another loss in a game where you really look back and say, boy, they had a lot of chances to win. They probably should have won that game. We find ourselves asking a lot of the same questions and pondering a lot of the same topics and concerns that we've had after a number of games, and some better, like the Virginia game, and some worse, like the Wake Forest game. And we're finding ourselves asking, not answering, but asking these questions over and over again throughout this season. I got a lot of thoughts on this, and I think you probably do too. So we've got a lot to discuss on the basketball front this week. Football-wise, it looks like Pitt has hired a wide receivers coach. They haven't made it official yet because they tend to take their time on these kinds of things. But Brennan Marion, a local guy, a guy with local roots who was coaching at Hawaii last season, has decided to go from Honolulu or wherever the University of Hawaii is to the University of Pittsburgh, which I think is a pretty good hire for Pitt, pretty good move for Brennan Marion. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to talk about some of the coaching changes that Pat Narduzzi has made. By my count, that's the 10th change that Narduzzi has made to his coaching staff since he got to Pitt in 2015, December of 2014, I guess. And so got a little bit to talk about there. Roster makeup heading into spring camp. We're going to talk about that as well. Basketball schedule and how it's ever going to shake out and shape up, and what it's going to turn into. We got a lot to talk about, which I think is always the case on the Panther-Lair Show, because there's always a lot going on in Pitt sports. Football, basketball, recruiting. There's always a lot happening. And of course, if you want to stay up to date on everything going on in the world of Pitt sports, Panther-Lair.com is the way to go. Pittsburgh.rivals.com. I always like to say it's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, recruiting. You can find it all at Panther-Lair.com. And of course, we have message boards where you can interact with hundreds and thousands of your closest Pitt fan friends. I always say the fun part of doing these live streams on a Tuesday night is that we get to have this interaction. We get to have this back and forth. I see people already rolling in to the rolling into the chat and chiming in and making comments, and Michael B already jumping in as a super chatter there. Really appreciate that. Throwing a little support behind the podcast, and we very much appreciate that. And we're going to get to your question right off the top here, Michael B. And that's the way, if you want to get into a conversation, you want to make sure your question gets answered, your comment gets read, make sure you can be a super chatter and throw a couple bucks to the podcast, and we'll make sure we get to your comment. But I always say, it's kind of the fun part of doing these live podcasts on Tuesday night is we can have this interaction, we can have this back and forth in these conversations, and we can talk about Pitt sports really in a not such a static, just me talking into the ether, but you and I interacting with each other and talking to each other. And I think what's neat about that is we can have that conversation. It's sort of what goes on the message boards all day, every day, where Pitt fans are on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com just talking about Pitt sports. Some of it good, some of it bad, but it's all Pitt fans having the conversation. I think that's kind of the fun of Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. So make sure you go check that out. And then, of course, before we get into the basketball conversation, I got to mention Homefield, homefieldapparel.com. That's the website you need to go to for Homefield Apparel. I actually have the Homefield shirt on. It's under my sweatshirt. You can see the sweet, vintage retro Panther logo there. That's some of the great stuff you're going to get at homefieldapparel.com. Whether it's Pitt or any other, they got a lot of schools that are licensed, for merchandising, and it's outstanding stuff. High quality shirts, high quality sweatshirts, great logos, great graphics. It's great. I'm just a big fan of Home Field. So, you definitely should check them out. Homefieldapparel.com. Like I say, it's a little cold to just have a t-shirt. So I got my Sun Bowl sweatshirt on there. So I got a lot of bowl gear around the house. I wear my pinstripe bowl hat all the time when it's cold out. It's a good winter hat. But when it comes to stuff that I'm going to actually buy, I'm going to go to homefieldapparel.com. It's the place to be. All right, Pitt basketball. Let's jump into the conversation. We'll start with Michael B's question because he was kind enough to be a super chatter, and we appreciate that. So I'm going to start right there with what he says. And he's saying, Chris, if Pitt chokes down the stretch again, that will be 3 in 3 years under Jeff Capel. Would he be on the hot seat in year 4 or year 5? All right, so this is a big topic of conversation on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. Pretty sure Michael B is involved in that conversation, and a lot of people are talking about Pitt struggling. I mean, they win the Duke game, and since then, they've got one win? One win in that stretch since then? Entered that game, I think, or after that Duke game, they were 4-1 in the ACC. They're 1-5 since then. One win in the last 6 conference games. And yeah, that doesn't look good. That's a slide. And I was right there with everyone else. I bought into this team after the Duke game because it came on the heels of the Miami game and the two Syracuse games, and then the Duke game, and then they hit the struggles, the Wake Forest, the Carolina, the Notre Dame games. Those were bad. And then they rebounded. They beat Virginia Tech, and it's impressive. And then they come pretty close against Virginia. They got a legitimate shot to win that game, and they just fall short. You start believing in this team again. And they go to Georgia Tech, and they lose by 6 to a team that I'm not going to say is immensely inferior to Pitt. I might not even say they're inferior to Pitt at all, but it's a game that was very much winnable for Pitt, and they just failed to do so. Now, Michael B brings up collapse. Says, it looks like Pitt is on the verge of a collapse, choking down the stretch, which would be 3 in 3 years under Jeff Capel. I'm not entirely sure I agree with your assessment on that, Michael B. I think 2 years ago in Capel's first year, they won, 3 games in the ACC? That wasn't really a collapse down the stretch. They just weren't good at all throughout the season. You know what I mean? I don't know if you would really say they collapsed 2 years ago in Capel's first year. They actually improved on the previous season. They won 3 games in the conference as opposed to 0. And last year, they go 6-14 in the ACC. You lose 14 games in a 20-game stretch, then you're going to have long losing streaks, whether at the beginning, or the middle, or the end. And last year they had a weird schedule where they didn't get any time off until the very end. It was sort of like the football team's schedule this past fall, where their bye week was like the last week of the regular season, so it wasn't really a bye at all. I mean, the basketball team was sort of in a similar situation. And there again, collapse, no collapse. If you lose 14 games in a 20-game stretch, you're going to have long losing streaks in there. That's sort of inevitable. But I think when you look at the big picture, they went from 0 ACC wins the year before Capel got to Pitt to 3 ACC wins his first year to 6 his next year. And now they're sitting here with who knows how many more games they're going to play, 4, maybe 5. Depending on, Clemson is up in the air for this weekend. And, who knows how many games they're actually going to make up of the postponed games that they have. But they're sitting here with 5 wins already. I think there's a decent chance, and really they should be able to get past last year's total of 6 conference wins. And probably do it while playing fewer than 20 conference games. And so we can talk about collapse, but I think the reality is I'm not looking at it as much as, how they play in the middle of the season or the end of the season or the beginning of the season. I'm looking for this team and this program to make year-to-year improvement. And that's where I think we get into an interesting conversation, because when we're looking at Jeff Capel right now, and I understand there's a lot of questions about Jeff Capel right now. I think there's a big part of the fan base that is wondering, all right, what are we doing here? Is the program improving? It really is a program that Jeff Capel has pretty much built over the last 3 years. This program is his. The situation he inherited was not of his making, but what has been built of this program over the last 3 years is entirely of his making, right? He brought all these guys to the team other than Terrell Brown, and he has built this roster, and he's put them together, and he's coached them for the last 3 years. And so I think you look for year-to-year improvement. Year 2 is better than year 1. I think pretty objectively. Has year 3 been better than year 2? I think it's hard to answer that when you're in the middle of it. Certainly when you're coming off a loss. You know what I mean? If we had this conversation after the Virginia Tech game, after the Duke game, after the Syracuse games, hell, after the Northwestern game, which is kind of a great example of how we evaluate things in the midst of a season and probably don't have the proper big picture perspective on it, or even after the Virginia game. Because I know what I said after the Virginia game. I know what I wrote after the Virginia game, and it was pretty positive, and it was pretty optimistic because I felt like the team had shown enough encouraging signs in beating Virginia Tech and then how they looked against Virginia. And if you had asked me after the Virginia Tech game, if you had asked me after the Virginia game, or the Duke game, on and on, like I just said, hey, if you had asked me, are they better now than they were a year ago? I would have said yes, without question. Now, in the wake of another loss, to a team that they at least could have beaten, if not should have beaten, it's a little harder to answer that strongly in the affirmative, right? I mean, and that just makes sense. I do think you can look overall and say, well, just on the strength of Justin Champagne's play, they're better this year than they were last year because Champagne's a lot better than he was last year. Abdul Karim Koulibaly is better than he was last year. Audice Toney is, I would say, not worse on the whole if you look whole season to whole season. Because remember, Toney really kind of took off in the second half of the season last year. And I would say, for the most part this season, he has more or less matched that. Xavier Johnson has basically been what he was, which in some ways is a disappointment, because you would have liked to have thought that he was going to take a step forward and improve. I think Ethiel Horton has finally, over the last few weeks, grown into an improvement, just from a personnel perspective and what he's been able to bring to the team. I think Femi Odekale has looked pretty good as a backup point guard. Would you say he's a better backup point guard than Pitt had last year? I mean, the backup point guard last year was, I guess Trey McGowan's. And it's hard to sort of compare those two because their games are very, very different. Although there are times when I think Odekale is kind of trying to do the same things that Xavier Johnson and Trey McGowan's did last year or 2 years ago, driving and sort of hoping for contact. And sometimes he gets it and gets a call, and sometimes he gets it and doesn't get the call. But I think on the whole, I would have to come down on the side of saying they're better this year than they were a year ago, which means improvement. Whether it's a late season collapse or not, and I know it was posted on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. I think Craig Meyer in the Post-Gazette wrote about late season collapses, losing streaks at the end of the season, and it's something that's sort of happened here over the last 2 years. It's something that happened in Oklahoma outside of the Blake Griffin year. And I guess that's something to consider, but I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not smart enough to tell you how that correlates with a coach. I'm not smart enough to tell you what the pattern is there, other than what I can tell you. I can't tell you what happened in Oklahoma because I don't know what happened in Oklahoma. What I can tell you is what has happened at Pitt over the last 2 years is they just haven't been good enough. And this year, they're better than they've been the previous 2 years, but they're still not good enough to pull it off. I'll tell you what's frustrating about this team, okay? And Michael B., we're going to come back to your question about hot seat entering next season and this and that. But I'll tell you what's frustrating about this team. And the Georgia Tech game was a great example. First half, they scored 22 points. Right? Isn't that what the score was at halftime? I have the box score right in front of me. I should know. Yeah, 31-22. They scored 22 points, 8 of 21 shooting, 38.1%, 8 made field goals in the entire first half. They go 4 of 10 from the free throw line. Okay? It's awful. It's miserable. They turned the ball over, 12 times or something like that? It's a terrible half. Awful play. Second half, they shoot 61% from the floor. You score 43 points. They outscored Georgia Tech in the second half, 43-40. And they shoot 61%. that to me says there's something else, right? So we can look at talent of the roster, right? We can look at coaching, and those are really kind of the two big factors, right? Well, and then execution, okay? So we can look at talent, which is, you know, what the players just sort of naturally bring to the team, you know, and bring to the court. We can look at coaching, which is what the coaches are able to get out of the players, help them develop, plan things around their strengths, the kind of things they try to do, the sets they run, and all that stuff. And then there's execution, what the players do with the coaching. Sort of, that's kind of the combination, I guess I would say. Right? Execution is sort of where the players take their talent and the coaching and put them together. And if they're able to effectively put them together, then you should get a good product on the court or on the field or on the diamond or wherever it is. Right? When I look and I see a team shoot 61% in the second half and they only made 8 field goals in the first half, when they score 43 points in the second half and only 22 in the first half, I rule out talent as being a big issue. Now, that's not to say that this roster is perfect. This roster has holes. I don't think there's any question about it. There are guys on this team that are not, at this point in their career, they're not good enough to win in the ACC. And there are guys who they get significant minutes. You know, and I mean, you saw it in the Virginia game. They only played 7 guys, and one of them was Terrell Brown, who played 3 minutes. So they shortened the bench because there are guys who are not ready. You know, and you can look at the minutes distribution right now on this team. You know, what I just said, the Virginia game, they played 7 guys. I think at Georgia Tech, they played 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 guys. But Nike Sabande played 2.5 minutes. Terrell Brown played just a little bit more than that, less than 3. And William Jeffers played 8 minutes. You got 6 guys right now. This is a 6-man rotation on this team for the significant minutes and the significant production. The main players on this team, there's 6. And I'm not entirely sure that all 6 of them are really ready to go. But there's enough talent that facing the same opponent, they can go from a 22-point half where they make 8 field goals and they can shoot 60% and score 43. Which tells me that talent's not the issue. So that brings us to the other 2, right? The coaching and the execution. Now, I'm not smart enough to tell you what they're being coached to do. I'm not. We got our guy Steven Gertz. He does an amazing job with film breakdowns on Panther-Lair.com. He does an outstanding job. The analysis he comes up with, the way he breaks down the film, he does voice overlays so he can really explain to you what's happening. I learned stuff from every single one of those. But I'm still not smart enough to tell you Jeff Capel's this or Jeff Capel's that. I know it's more than Jeff Capel rolls the ball out on the court, which there's a feeling that I think there's a certain perception among Pitt fans that that's all Capel does. He just rolls the ball out on the court and lets them play. But there's more to it than that. Okay, I know that. I've learned that from Steve's film breakdowns. I know that there's more to it than just rolling the ball out on the court. They run sets. They try to do things on offense. And I'll tell you the thing I've gathered from these film breakdowns that, again, someone far smarter than me has put together, that there's a lot of times the issue is in the execution. The issue is in how they screen. The issue is in the defensive effort. The urgency. I mean, there was a great, and it was highlighted by the goofballs on the announcing crew. I mean, they were just being goofy with all the Brooklyn and all this stuff. But during the Georgia Tech game, 3-point shooter in the corner, right in front of the bench, right in front of the Georgia Tech bench. I think it was in the second half, wide open, and Justin Champagne's effort to get over and even put a hand in his face was lacking. You know, and that's a problem with this team, and that's an execution issue where the coaching and talent are not being merged effectively. You know, I don't think Justin Champagne was coached to be late on getting over to put a hand in the face of that shooter. You know, I don't think these guys, I think they're being coached to set effective screens and use screens effectively. But it's not happening on the court. Now, that could be an issue of coaching. I don't think there's any question about it. Could be an issue of execution. It's probably a little bit of both. Ultimately, the onus falls on the coaches. It's their job to raise the level of execution. You know, it's their job to make sure the players understand what they are supposed to be doing and put the best players in the best position to do it. somewhere in there, there's a balance, and there's an explanation of why they're falling short in these games. I mean, Notre Dame was just a dog effort. You lose by 26 at home to that team. It was a dog performance. I don't think there's any question about it. I think the players and coaches, they might not use those terms, but the players and coaches, I think, would acknowledge that. The Wake Forest game, Wake Forest shoots insane from outside. And some of that was on Pitt, and a lot of that was Wake Forest. And Pitt still had a chance to win it at the end. I mean, they still had opportunities that they blew in that game. The Virginia game we talked about, it was basically a 4-minute stretch where Virginia just took over the game. Pitt was better, at least the equal of, if not better than Virginia for the other 36 minutes of the game. But for those 4 minutes, Cavaliers took over. And then you have this game against Georgia Tech. This tale of two halves nonsense. And quite frankly, Pitt's defense wasn't great against Georgia Tech at all throughout the game. And certainly, there are a lot of different things we can look at there. 8 of 15 from the free throw line is a big one. Only 5 free throw attempts in the second half seems pretty significant to me as well. But somewhere there's a balance with this team, and I can't figure out what it is. I can't figure out how they can play two halves like they did against Georgia Tech. I can't figure out how they can have a performance like they did against Notre Dame. I can't figure out how they can give up the threes against Wake Forest. I can't figure out how they could play so well against Virginia Tech and give Virginia a battle like that, and play so well against Duke and blow out Syracuse. Can't figure this team out. And I think there's a lot of factors. I mean, Michael B., you mentioned Capel and talk about him, and I think that's part of it, but boy, it's hard for me to place exactly what it is. Ultimately, it always falls on the coach, but this team is tough to figure out, and I think it's got to be tough for Capel to figure out too. Now, Michael B., the other part of your question, I'm going to come back to you here, because you say, would Jeff Capel be on the hot seat in year 4 or year 5 if there's a collapse down the stretch? I mean, part of it is we could get into semantics. What does collapse mean? And are you talking about losing every game the rest of the way, or only winning 1 or 2? I would say this, all right? It's year 3 now for Jeff Capel. And I think we're pretty far removed from the Kevin Stallings, winless ACC season. And, every year that we move further from that, we probably forget it a little bit more. But there's a feeling I've had, a thought I've had, really for the last 2 years. And every now and then I've just sort of looked around and tried to take stock on it. When you pull back the camera and take sort of the big picture look at this program and understand that, and it's not entirely Kevin Stallings. It's probably something that started happening before he got to Pitt, but by golly, the dirt went on the coffin with him at Pitt and during his time at Pitt. How far the program fell from national relevance and national prominence during those 2 years. Pitt, at best, was a laughingstock during that second year. I mean, even from the time they hired Kevin Stallings. I mean, you're not going to find a lot of people who praise that hire, particularly on a national level. It was generally, there were more than a few raised eyebrows about that one. And then, as the losing started, what kind of headlines did Pitt get over those 2 years? They got Kevin Stallings yelling at a fan at Louisville. That's the kind of headline you want. They lost to Duquesne, which I don't know if anybody even noticed or cared. And then by the time they were going 0-18, nobody was even paying attention. For a program like Pitt that's not a blue blood, it's really hard to recruit top talent if you are not winning at a really high level and part of the national conversation. Pitt got there. Pitt was part of the national conversation. Pitt was prominent. Pitt was successful, and they were able to recruit well in the 2000s. What Jeff Capel walked into was a program that just didn't matter. It didn't resonate nationally on the college basketball scene. Beyond the occasional nostalgic pining for the Big East, and how Pitt sunk its program by going to the ACC. That was it, right? And so Jeff Capel's trying to rebuild a program that was completely off the radar. And we all got excited in his first year when he won 3 games in the ACC. Boy, when he beat Florida State, when he beat Louisville, woo! I mean, it was unbelievable, But that was locally. That was around the program. That was for people who had watched what Pitt had become under Kevin Stallings, or in those 2 years. Nationally, you were still a 3-win team. The 3 wins is 3 wins. No matter what you did the year before. Nobody cared because you only won 3. And then last year, they doubled their win total in the ACC to 6. They went 6-14. You're not getting any headlines when you go 6-14. Now this year, you started to see what happened a little bit. After they beat Duke, they were 4-1 in the ACC. People started taking notice. People started writing about Pitt. People started talking about Pitt on a national scale. That's how it works. But if you're not a blue blood, they're going to keep talking about Kentucky and Duke, even though Kentucky and Duke are down. They're going to keep talking about Kansas. They kept talking about North Carolina last year. They keep talking about the blue bloods. But if you're Pitt or... Boston College is a bad example because they're talking about Boston College right now because they fired Jim Christian in the middle of a pandemic season. But if you're Pitt and you're not winning, you're not going to get attention. And if you're not getting attention, you're not prominent, and you don't have that success, it's hard to recruit. And so I've seen people criticize Jeff Capel's recruiting. Man, he got Johnson, McGowens, and Tony in that first class, a month after he got to campus. Second year, that first full recruiting class, the next year wasn't great, although Justin Champagne's obviously turned out to be pretty good. And then this past year, he got Will Jefferson, John Hugley, a couple of 4-star recruits. Hugley's situation notwithstanding, he's done pretty well there, I think, in recruiting. Landing those 2 guys, landing Jefferson, Hugley, were big. Landing Johnson and McGowens were big. And Tony as well. And then obviously, like I say, Champagne has panned out pretty well. I think his recruiting has been good. No, he doesn't have any commitments for 2021. They're working like crazy on a 5-star center. And it's not really clear that there are many options beyond that. And I understand that gives some fans some concern. But I think it's really tough to recruit unless you have that success and that prominence behind you. And I think the success that they've had on the recruiting trail is entirely a testament to Jeff Capel. It's a different world when you're not recruiting with that, Duke logo on your chest. And we've talked about that since he arrived. And we've asked Jeff Capel about it. And, to his credit, he's always said things like, oh, well, it's recruiting's recruiting. It's all the same. We're trying to build relationships and blah, blah, blah. But it's not, especially not in basketball. You walk into a gym with Duke or Carolina or Kansas or Kentucky on your shirt, it's a different look. You're going to get a different respect than if you walk in with Pitt or, take your pick, Illinois, or someplace, Iowa. And these are all programs that have had success, but you're not the blue blood programs that are going to get that respect and attention right away. And so I think given the circumstances, I think Jeff Capel's recruited pretty well. I think he's in, very encouraging position with some guys in the 2022 recruiting class, that next class that's coming up after this 2021 class. So I think he's recruited well, and I think you have to take a big picture look at the program and where it was, and you're not going to be able to. And Capel, to his credit, never tries to hang anything on what he inherited or what he walked into. He did a year or two ago. He talked about, what it was like for the players, and they hadn't been used to much winning around here and that kind of thing. He doesn't make excuses and say, yeah, but you got to consider the situation I came into. But I'll say it, and it won't last forever. You won't be able to keep bringing up Kevin Stallings for the next 3 years, but at least through the this year, next year, at least through his first 3, 4, 5 seasons, you're going to be able to bring up, I think, Kevin Stallings and say, look at what Jeff Capel inherited. And I am of the mind that I think you can turn around a basketball program quicker than you can turn around a football program. I think that's true because, 1 or 2 star players, you can really get it going. But I think it can be tough to get those kinds of players. It can be tough to make that quick turnaround when you don't have when you're trying to battle just to reestablish the name Pitt in the world of college basketball. Because you got to win to keep it up there. And it was there for a long time. And you can, like I say, you can even go back to the last, Jamie Dixon's last couple years. Down to that Wisconsin game in the NCAA tournament, Dixon's final game at Pitt. It was falling. The star was falling. The brand was fading. And then it got completely, deep sixth by the Stallings era. So that's a long-winded, half hour or whatever on, what I think is the current state of the basketball program. Let's get into a few thoughts and comments and questions. S. Mac says, I don't trust this team to do well down the stretch. Hopefully they go far in the NIT. I mean, here's the thing. Like, I agree with you. I don't trust them right now because I don't know who they are. I can't figure them out. It's really confusing to me who this team is. And like I said, we could go to the Georgia Tech game and just look at that one. 8 made field goals in the first half, 61% shooting in the second half. Who the hell are you? What kind of... I can't figure it out. And I think it's confusing. And that's why it's hard to figure out this game. There's a text chain going on with all of us who... all of us who write at Panther-Lair.com, me, Jim Hammett, and Houston Wilson, and Matt Steinbrink, and Steve Gertz, and we do our staff picks, and we're picking for this NC State game on Wednesday night, and I'm just reading some of the text messages, and guys are laughing about it. They just have no idea. Ooh, what do you pick? They should not lose to NC State, but they shouldn't have lost to Wake Forest. They shouldn't have lost to Notre Dame. They shouldn't have lost to St. Francis. Probably shouldn't have beat Virginia Tech. Probably shouldn't have been able to give Virginia a game. Who are they? I can't figure them out. If you can figure them out, by all means, please tell me who they are. Brock Madonic says, give me a percentage of these 3 players, Audice Toney, Xavier Johnson, and Justin Champagnie, either staying for next year or transferring. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I would have to think. Okay, everything I'm about to say is complete speculation on my part. All right, don't take this as gospel. This isn't sourced reporting or anything like that. But I look at Xavier Johnson. Where's he going to go? He's not going to go pro, right? And I don't know if he's going to find a team, unless he transfers down a level, that's going to give him as much of a role as he has at Pitt. Of being a lead point guard playing, what did he play at Georgia Tech? Well, he played 20 minutes because he had foul trouble. All right, bad example. I don't know if there's another team that's, I don't know if he's going to find another place that's going to give him the opportunity to play as much as he does at Pitt. To have the role that he has at Pitt. I don't see him going anywhere. Audice Toney, I don't know. Again, he's got a prominent role. Does he fit in on another team? You know what I mean? He's such a unique player. I don't know if Pitt necessarily has a good role for him, but he's such a unique player that I feel like a coach would have to really feel like he fits what they're trying to do in a very particular way because he's got such a particular skill set. I don't know. I'm not sure. But I can't rule anything out. I wouldn't be surprised if he decided to look for somewhere to go for his senior year. And then Justin Champagnie, obviously the big question there is the NBA. Does he leave and go to the NBA? And I think what might be the X factor in that situation is his knee injury. I don't think that knee, he came back very quick from it. And to his credit, he's mostly played really well since he came back, but he doesn't look like he's 100%. And, it doesn't seem like he's fully back. And if he has to have surgery after the season, which I think is probably a possibility, what does that do for his draft prospects? That might force his hand to come back for another year. So, I mean, I can't give you percentages, Brock. I don't know. I think there's too many factors to consider with each of these guys. So, and then Pitt just agreed to a game with St. John's for next year. I mean, not to read too much into it, but his twin brother plays for St. John's. I mean, do they, hold on to something there? You know what I mean? Is that something we should read into? Who knows at this point? Let's see here. Anthony Tennyson says Jeff Capel has to really try to get Justin Champagny and IT. I'm guessing you mean Ithiel Horton into more pick and roll opportunities, and that'll help Justin get more shots. Champagny's such an interesting guy, though. Like, you run offense for him, but he's such a catch and shoot type of guy. He doesn't really create off the dribble, and so much of what he does seems to come off offensive rebounds or, kind of drive and dish to him type of situations. I'm sure there's offense to run for him, but again, I mean, I'm not a genius when it comes to basketball. I'm not a basketball coach or anything like that. I'm sure there's more they could do to get him involved in the offense, but I mean, so much of his game is built on just sort of flow of the play. Guy dishes it off and he, gets a jumper or he gets an offensive rebound and a putback, things like that. I don't know. I don't know how you maximize a guy like that. Kevin Plaucha says it's very hard to trust this team when they seem so inconsistent from game to game. For example, from Virginia Tech to Georgia Tech. I want to trust them and trust that the same problems won't keep happening, but it's hard. So, yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that's very true, Kevin. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head when you go. I mean, just go Notre Dame, a 26-point blowout to Virginia Tech, a win. To Virginia, loss on the road, 7 points, but they were 11-point dogs, looked pretty good. Like I say, played Virginia pretty tough. To this game against Georgia Tech, where what are you doing? It's impossible to figure out. I can't figure them out, and they are inconsistent. They're inconsistent. I mean, you say from game to game, they're inconsistent from half to half. They're inconsistent from 5-minute stretch to 5-minute stretch or 4-minute stretch to 4-minute stretch. They're inconsistent all over the place. And it's tough to figure out. You know what else is tough to figure out? The schedule. Tony Tennyson brings it up, says, I think the Sunday game is going to get canceled. I don't know if that game, it hasn't been canceled yet. At least I haven't seen, let me see. I got an email from Pitt around 4 o'clock today with game notes that includes the schedule. Yeah, the Clemson game is still on for Saturday at the Peterson Event Center, but Clemson just had a midweek game canceled, so we'll see what happens there. It seems unlikely. They had, I think Boston College might be off this weekend, so maybe that would be a game that Pitt could pick up because they had a Boston College game postponed earlier this season. But is Boston College even going to want to play any more games than what they have scheduled? They fired their coach mid-season in the middle of a pandemic. And I don't know the details behind it. I'm not sure if there's any more additional reporting on what happened there with Jim Christian. But, I mean, is anybody at Boston College really, bending over backward to try and get another game in? I got to imagine that that's going to be unlikely to pull in there. I don't know. Let's see here. Will Z says, problem is it's the same thing plaguing Pitt year after year. Rebounding, turnovers, free throws, none of which improved and not became worse. That's coaching. I mean, yeah, except they're one of the best, by the numbers, one of the best rebounding teams in the conference. They out-rebounded Georgia Tech, 29-24. They're a great offensive rebounding team. They got appreciably better as rebounders this year. They're better rebounding this year than they were in previous years. Yeah, turnovers are still an issue, and that's a problem with Xavier Johnson. He had 7 turnovers at Georgia Tech. That's something that's sort of consistent with this team, or at least with Johnson, is the turnover issues. But and then free throws, I don't know. Like you say, it's on coaching. I guess I don't know what to. I don't know what to make of it. It was an issue with Jamie Dixon, and he would always talk about it was things like, well, you look at who's getting fouled, who's going to the free throw line. A lot of times it's the centers or the big guys, and they're not going to be great free throw shooter. I don't know what it is. I can't explain it. I can't explain how Pitt went 4 of 10 from the free throw line in the first half against Georgia Tech. I don't get it. I don't. But I've never been able to understand teams that are bad at free throw shooting. They're one of the worst in the country. I don't know how that can be. I guess somebody has to be worst, but I don't know why it has to be Pitt, and I'm not sure why they haven't gotten better over time. Let's see. Grant Nieport says, what's the percentage chance of Efton Reed coming to Pitt? Yeah, Reed is that 5-star center I mentioned in the 2021 class. I think Pitt's in really good shape to land him, assuming he doesn't try to go one of the pro routes that are available to guys coming out of high school. It would be huge to get him. I'll tell you what, to be honest too, a big offseason acquisition for this team would be getting John Hugley back. I don't know what's going to come of his legal situation. It sure doesn't look good when you look at, the reports and the police reports and all those things. But if somehow it ends up that charges get reduced or dropped or something like that, and they find a way to get him back on this roster, I think it could be huge for this team. Because I think Hugley was a big part of what Capel was building. I really do. I think they obviously, like I say, want to land Efton Reed in this 2021 class. And I think, but I think Hugley was really important. I think he was a centerpiece with that 2020 or the 2020 class, along with Will Jeffers. Jeffers, of course, being really young, as we've all talked about, and that's been a big storyline with him. So you expect him to be better as his career goes on. But I think with Hugley as well, I think they expected him to play, significant minutes this year. Maybe not starter minutes, but significant minutes this year, and then even more next year. And I think he showed a couple flashes during the time that he played with Pitt of what he could potentially be. And I think it was going to change the outlook for this team, short-term and long-term. And losing him, I think, is a big blow. I don't know if they'll be able to get him back. I don't have any new details or anything like that on it, but I think that would be huge. Look, if this offseason, if all they could do this offseason with the roster is get Efton Reed and John Hugley get back, that'd be a great offseason for Capel and Pitt. It really would. Leon Moore 23 says, I like Jeff Capel, but I'm a little worried. No big guy. End of season collapses. He was so right for this job too. Yeah, look, I mean, I'll be the first to say, when Jeff Capel was hired, I was all over it. Of this is exactly the kind of coach that Pitt needs to get. A guy with head coaching experience, a guy with a deep background in the ACC and in Pitt's recruiting territory that they need to highlight. Obviously, a long apprenticeship in one of the best programs in the country, one of the best programs in the conference. Yeah, I mean, this is it's becoming an overused phrase, but he checks all the boxes. He was, if not a perfect hire, damn close. But you need to see more results. But I mean, this comes back to kind of what I was talking about of what kind of rebuild Jeff Capel took on and how long it might actually need to take. You're right. He hasn't really gotten a big guy, but he got John Hugley in his second full recruiting class. He got John Hugley, who's a pretty good big guy, and that hasn't worked out for various reasons. But you look at his issues with the center position. He inherited Terrell Brown, who seems to have all the tools and just can't put it together on the court. And then he recruited Abdul Kareem Coulibaly, who, look, I think if you're looking for encouraging signs this season, he's one of them. He's been surprisingly good at times and gotten better over the course of the season. But, high-quality big men are at a premium in college basketball. And landing those guys, you need to be a blue blood or a really successful team. I think it's tough to do. And I think over time, if Capel can get the results on the court up and get Pitt's prominence up and get in the top 25 and sort of be a consistently ranked team, he'll have a better chance in those situations. If he could get Efton Reed, 5-star center, that'd be a pretty good place. That'd be a pretty good start too. Let's see here. Let's scroll down. I think we got another super chat jumping in. We do. Josh Lobig, sorry to take a delay on get to your question, Josh. I appreciate you chiming in as a super chatter. We very much appreciate the support. 2 questions. Anything to take away from Au'Diese Toney's offensive struggles, and how much do you think that the lack of Hugley and his size has affected this team? Yeah, great questions, Josh. And like I said, I was just talking about Hugley and how much I think he could help them. He's not like a 7-footer, but he's a big post player, a big guy who can play under the basket, and not just tall, but big. You know what I mean? Like a DeJuan Blair type of build, but maybe a little bit taller than DeJuan. I would have to see him stand up, back to back to see who really is taller out of those two. But I think it hurts because that would be more depth, more guys you could rotate in at the center position. It's pretty clear that Terrell Brown's not a primary option for this team at center. We just haven't. It's become apparent, right? We all know that. We all realize that, and I think Terrell acknowledges it as well, probably. But if Abdul Kareem Coulibaly gets into foul trouble, then you don't have any other options. Well, Hugley would have been another option, and it would have given you an option to take some of the pressure off of Coulibaly. The Coulibaly wouldn't have to play the minutes that he's playing. I think that's a big. I think it's a big loss, and I think he was only going to keep getting better, really game to game, which I think we saw some flashes of that. And now, he's missing all of this time, and who knows what his future holds. It would be huge if they could get him back. Like I said, I think it'd be huge. And then Josh also asked anything to take away from Au'Diese Toney's offensive struggles. I don't know. I don't know what to make of Toney. He's been really good at doing a lot of different things for this team. His 3-point shooting, I know he ended up 2 of 4 in the Georgia Tech game. I think the Virginia game, I would have to go look at the stats on that one, but I'm sort of at the point where even when he gets an open shot, I'm not really sure it's a great idea that he takes it. I like Au'Diese Toney's game when he's doing sort of, I don't know, kind of like Nasir Robinson type of stuff. I've said from time to time that I sort of see Au'Diese Toney as Nasir Robinson with a jump shot because I think he's a little bit better of a shooter than Robinson was. But he also does a lot. He rebounds, gets a lot of kind of dirty points. Not dirty, but scrappy points. Putbacks and offensive rebounds and, battle for the ball, get on the court. I like his game a lot. He's been in a bit of a slump offensively. I don't think there's any question about it. But since the midpoint of last season, I like what he's been. And I like what he's done for this team. And I like what he's brought. And he needs to... he needs to settle back into his groove. Looking at the Georgia Tech stats, 6 of 14 from the floor, 15 points, 9 rebounds. Not a bad game, but you'd like him to be a little more efficient than 6 of 14. Lots of comments and conversations here. We got a lot of basketball talk. Everybody's chiming in. I appreciate it, guys. Let's see here. People are talking about Terrell Brown and comparing him to other guys. Since we only got about 10 minutes left or so, I do want to jump into the football coaching hire just because it just happened. Like I said, we had a lot going on this week. You got the Pitt Georgia Tech game on Sunday, and then Monday reports start coming out. Something we actually mentioned on Saturday, that Brennan Marion, Greensburg-Salem alum, a guy who was coaching wide receivers at Hawaii, was looking like he was going to be the guy to take the wide receivers coaching position at Pitt. Chris Beatty, of course, left to be the receivers coach with the Los Angeles Chargers. Big loss for Pitt because Beatty is a great recruiter. I think he did a good job with the wide receivers. I think they liked him. I think he was an asset on Pitt's staff for the last 2 years that he was here. He had a lot to do with the Virginia guys they got this season. And, I think it had gotten them in the door with a bunch of Virginia guys in, upcoming recruiting classes. And so it was a loss, and I think they had to get a good hire to replace Chris Beatty. And, you don't want to reduce it to one thing or the other, but this new hire had to be someone I think that was a good recruiter. I think they needed to add another really strong recruiter to this staff because when you had, the staff in 2019 and 2020, they didn't have any change. They didn't have any turnover from 2019 to 2020. Same staff intact. Those 2 years, I think it was the best staff that Pat Narduzzi had put together. At the very least, the best recruiting staff that he put together with Chris Beatty, with Charlie Partridge, Corey Sanders. I think Archie Collins is really good. I think Andre Powell is pretty good. I think Tim Salem, whatever you want to say about him, is a pretty good recruiter. I think, Rob Harley does a good job. or did a good job. He's since left to be the defensive coordinator at Arkansas State. It was a really good recruiting staff. You take Chris Beatty out of that mix, and that's a big hit because really Beatty and Partridge are the two sort of big guns. And I tell you, Corey Sanders isn't far behind. He's a really good recruiter too. But Beatty and Partridge were sort of the big guns on the staff in terms of recruiting. And you take one of those guys out of the mix, you need to replace it. You need to replace that recruiting firepower. You need someone who can come in with connections, with contacts, with a sort of geographic territory where they can really work and build for you. And they have to just be good at recruiting. And that's not a skill that everyone is born with. And it's based on a lot of things. It's based on personality, it's based on relatability, it's based on just pure hard work. I always say, and I've said this, you've heard this on the podcast a million times, you've read this on Panther-Lair.com a million times. I remember asking Jeff Hafley. Jeff Hafley, Boston College head coach, obviously started out at Pitt. It was a GA and then became the, defensive backs coach and all that stuff. Well known as a great recruiter. And yeah, he had great connections in New Jersey. He knew all the high school coaches and, he connected with the players well and all that stuff. They all like Springsteen or something. But I remember asking him, I was like, what is it, man? Like, it's not just that you know all the coaches. What is it that, what is good recruiting? What makes a good recruiter? And he said, look, it's hard work. You just have to work all the time. Because what you always have to do with the guys you're after, the recruits you're trying to get, and even a bunch of the guys you're not trying to get, you need to keep Pitt prominent in their minds. You need to make sure they're always thinking about Pitt. You don't want to dominate their thoughts or anything like that. You're not trying to mind control, but you want to make sure that whenever they're thinking about colleges, Pitt is always sort of there. And to do that, you maintain constant contact. And it was different when Jeff Hafley was at Pitt. That was 12, 13 years ago, or 10 years ago, 11, give or take. It was different then. You did things differently. There were a lot of letters. There were phone calls. I don't even know if you could text message at that time. Twitter was still new, and so direct messages were kind of coming along. But now you have even more access to the recruits. You have easier ways of getting in touch with them, and you have to do it constantly. You have to work. It's hard work. There's no magic elixir. There's no secret trick or anything like that. You just have to work as hard as you can. Tim Salem, who's whatever you want to say about him, says recruiting is like shaving. You have to do it every day or else you look like a bum. It's something you cannot skate on. And so this new hire, the wide receiver coach hire, had to be someone who got that. Someone who understood it and could be a good recruiter for Pitt. And in hiring Brennan Marion, I think they got someone who can do it. I don't know if he'll do as good as Beatty did, but I think they got someone who's young, who's driven, who's energetic, can relate to the players, and I think is going to go out and work his he's not going to get outworked on the recruiting trail. And that's a big thing. You might lose out on recruits because of attendance, you know what I mean? The big crowds, the 100,000 people, or national championships or things like that. You never want to lose out because you got outworked. Okay? And I think a guy like Charlie Partridge understands that. I think a guy like Chris Beatty understands that. I know, like I said, a guy like Jeff Hafley understands that. I think Brennan Marion understands that. He strikes me as the type of coach who gets it in that regard. I think Ryan Manilak, the new linebackers coach, former Bucknell defensive coordinator, has some of that too. Of just sort of a young energy to really get out and work. And I think that's a big thing. Of course, the other side with Marion, hiring Marion, is it's not just a receivers coach. This is a guy who, prior to going to Hawaii last year, had been the offensive coordinator for 3 years. 1 year at William & Mary and 2 years at Howard. And that's not unimportant because while he was in those positions, he made a name for himself as not just a great young coach or a very good young coach, but a very good offensive mind. And he's written a book and he's done videos and he's had articles written about him. And he's certainly established his brand and gotten it out there quite a bit. But I think that's important too. And there's always going to be questions, what's Marion's influence on the offense? And, what kind of input is he going to have? I think coaching is probably more collaborative than we give it credit for. I think there's a lot of overlap in what guys do. I think there are a lot of very sort of defined and delineated roles, but I think there's also a lot of overlap and cooperative work. I mean, it's a collaborative effort to coach an offense, to design an offense and execute an offense and game plan an offense. And I think his input is going to be it's going to be offered, and I think it probably will be welcomed. And I mean, Mark Whipple's, he's been around for a long time. He's a veteran coach. I don't know about the teaching old dog new tricks type of thing, but I think, there's an understanding that this offense has to be better than it was in previous years. And I think if you can bring more offensive minds into it, guys who have success with effective offenses, productive offenses, which certainly if you look at Brennan Marion's 2 years at Howard, it certainly was. And it's not just pass happy. I think they led their conference in rushing 2 years in a row as well. So there's a really interesting resume to work with here with Brennan Marion. And I got to tell you, I like the hire. I'm impressed with what Pat Narduzzi did with this wide receiver position search. We wrote about another guy that he strongly considered for the job, a guy from, where is he from? East Carolina, another one that just looks really impressive on paper. You say, boy, this is you can see what the goal was. You can see what they were trying to get for this receiver coach position, and you can see who they really targeted and highlighted. And I think it's pretty impressive. I think it was a pretty impressive show by Narduzzi to go into as he approached this coaching cycle, this cycle of hiring coaches. And I think getting Brennan Marion, it makes a lot of sense. It made sense from the very beginning. And kudos to Narduzzi for making it happen. And congratulations to Brennan Marion. I think he's a guy who, as soon as the Pitt receivers coach position came open 2 years ago when Chris Beatty got hired, I think he wanted the job then. And I think he definitely wanted the job this time. And, good for him for pulling it off and getting it. And like I say, credit to Pat Narduzzi for making it happen. So the coaching staff seems to be set unless somebody else decides to leave. I don't think anybody else is going to go, but I guess anything's possible. But the coaching staff seems to be set with a pretty good group. We'll have to wait and see how Brennan Marion ends up comparing to Chris Beatty on the recruiting trail, but I think on the whole it's a pretty impressive group. All right, make sure you want to get more on Pitt sports. Make sure you stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, recruiting. We cover it all at Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, we have the message boards where you can have conversations just like this all day, every day, Panther-Lair.com. Listen, if you are watching the live stream here on Tuesday night, we really appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you subscribe to Panther-Lair.com on YouTube. All right, we that's what's valuable to me. I like everybody who likes the videos and likes the live streams. That's cool to see. I like the likes, but I like the subscriptions even more. It doesn't cost any money or anything like that. But click that subscribe button. Subscribe to Panther-Lair.com on YouTube. That would be awesome. Panther-Lair.com. It's youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Pantherlaircom. Also, got to mention homefieldapparel.com. Listen, go get some new Pitt shirts. Go get some new Pitt sweatshirts. You owe it to yourself to get some good gear. This weather we're having, this ice, and all this other nonsense, man, you need something. You need a little gift for yourself. You know what I mean? Give yourself a little congratulations for not wiping out on the ice too many times. And if you did fall on the ice, then give yourself a little treat to feel better. Homefieldapparel.com. They're great shirts, great sweatshirts for Pitt and a bunch of other schools. You will not be disappointed. Homefieldapparel.com. Thanks to everybody who tuned in on the live stream tonight. It was a lot of fun. I really appreciate it. We always enjoy doing these things. Thanks to everybody who listened to the podcast through the week. If you like listening to the podcast, but you want to get in on the conversation as well, every Tuesday night, 8:30 p.m., we tape this thing live, man, on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So come check it out. Love to have you join the conversation. Until then, have a great rest of the week. Enjoy the Pitt game on Wednesday night. Don't forget the Panthers Insider Show Saturday morning at 8 a.m. on 93.7 The Fan. We got that going on, so don't forget that. Make sure you check that out. And stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com. Have a great rest of the week. Have a great weekend coming up here in a few days. And we'll talk to you next Tuesday night at 8:30. Panther-Lair Show. Thanks a lot.